Welcome.
Thank
Can't
you.
wait to get into this discussion about the UFC, biohacking, nasal breathing, the small jaw epidemic,
Yeah.
and how we're going to change medicine altogether is going to be a huge paradigm shift in healthcare. We're going to get into all of that
We're going to
in
get
this
deep, I
talk.
think. Okay, as a doctor, why do you think this concept, this idea of mouth breathing and nose breathing has been lost?
Yeah. I think that the prevalence, I think about this a lot, and I think that the prevalence has been increasing for environmental reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Our jaws are getting smaller. We know that. So if you look at
Why do you think it's getting smaller?
Yeah. So if you look at skulls, and this stuff is in Stanford, Harvard.
The book Jaws, have you read that?
I haven't read it yet.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
It's a difficult read, but it's a good book.
Yeah. I'll look into it. But if and this stuff is studied in Asia, Europe, America. It's been there this knowledge has been there for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That 500 years ago, for thousands of years, jaws had space for wisdom teeth. They had straight teeth, and they were so much stronger than they are now. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, or agricultural first, then Industrial Revolution, and there's noticeable changes in jaw size.
Yeah.
So chewing has one thing to do with it. From going from hunter gatherers and chewing real food
Processed soft foods,
to going
right?
to rice and processed foods. That agricultural revolution made a change. And then you go to the industrial revolution, and now everything's processed. But more than that, breastfeeding used to be a necessary thing, right? And it used to be necessary for many years.
Okay.
Before there was grocery stores for thousands of years, you know, families had to breastfeed their babies to get them the calories.
So are you saying that the lack of breastfeeding
Yeah.
is like the start of it?
It's a huge, huge factor, because if you think about breastfeeding, there's a lot of action that has to happen in that jaws in a very critical part of human development, the first year of life, where the most growth is happening.
Okay.
And the breastfeeding is really using all the action of the jaw muscles for force, right? So if you eliminate that and go to a bottle now, Nestle came out with breast milk, formula milk, 100
Yeah.
or something years ago. And now you have bottles which don't require the same force. It's very easy to get that fluid out. The babies are not exercising their jaw muscles. So there is a component of development there. The other thing that has to happen when babies are breastfeeding for hours every day, they have to nose breathe, right? Because their
Yeah.
mouth is sealed. So while they're feeding for hours, they're nose
They're
breathing.
working that muscle.
So
right.
it develops nasal breathing better than if they're not. So multifactorial for sure. I think that food's one of them. Breastfeeding is another one.
Do you think like nookies and stuff too?
Definitely. Now you have pacifiers and all these things.
Yeah.
The problem with pacifiers and these mouth habits for these children is that they start to form the teeth, and the pressure changes from
Yeah.
sucking on them, narrow the arches,
And does
open
it
the bites.
push the bottom jaw back too?
Correct.
Yeah.
So now what you have is all these factors that together are working on these jaws to not only reach their full potential, but destroy their potential. And then you have adults where almost everyone, like you said, is mouth breathing because they can't nasal breathe. The problem with the jaws is that not only is a small jaw going to limit the tongue space, because the tongue is housed in the upper and lower jaw, but what people don't realize is the inside of the nose, the turbinates and septum, sit on the upper jaw,
Yeah.
right? That's the floor of the nasal structures. So if upper jaws are narrow and recessed, that nose is confined inside,
Yeah.
and airflow is highly resistant. So people can't nose breathe. And then when they can't nose breathe, they mouth breathe. Mouth breathing actually lengthens the face and puts the jaws backwards.
Yeah.
And we know that. We
Right.
used to call it adenoid faces because
Right.
we noticed for many years that kids who had large tonsils and adenoids and were mouth breathing developed these long recessed faces. So it's like all this science is there. People didn't really put it together because it's happening gradually. And then what happens is it happened gradually enough that everyone started to fall into this category. So it became normal. So when things are so common, we accept them as normal,
Yeah.
and it's hard to appreciate that it's wrong, right?
Right.
So I make a kind of ridiculous analogy that if 10,000 years from now, for some reason, men and women developed only one leg instead of two, but that's all everybody saw,
You think it's normal?
they would think that humans have,
Yeah.
have one leg. It's normal unless they actually zoomed out 10,000 years and said, hey, these guys used to run around with
Right.
two feet, two legs for thousands of years before us.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. If you zoom out from 500 years ago and look for thousands of years, our jaws are crippled.
Yeah.
They're small, and it changes the mouth breathing and everything. So I actually think that the incidence of having irregular jaws and breathing issues, nasal and mouth, the entire airway structure is probably 90% or more
Yeah.
worldwide. And it's just so normal that we accept it. But what's interesting for you and I is that we're recognizing this is a problem, and it starts with us, right?
Right.
We have insight to say, hey, I'm mouth breathing, this is not right. And it just takes a book or even a podcast or conversation to make sense of it and say, oh yeah, I should be breathing through the nose. And there's obvious benefits of facial development, better sleep, nitric oxide production. There's so many benefits to nasal breathing. And then it's like you just start unfolding this, and it's very easy. We call it a rabbit hole to get into, but really it's just common sense and information that's out there that I think that my prediction is in the next 5-10 years, everybody's going to be working at better breathing.
New information comes out, most people will blast it as being like the dumbest thing ever, right? And then at some point, all of a sudden, it flips and it's accepted as normal.
Correct.
And that's
you got to
exactly
get through that hurdle.
At some point, people are going to stop saying hostage tape is crazy and it's the dumbest thing they've ever seen.
Absolutely.
And they're going to realize, oh, absolutely, yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, you got to nasal breathe at all costs, really.
Yeah, totally.
So besides the nasal strip, you have the mouth tape.
Yeah, so the hero product is the mouth tape, right? So the mouth tape that's the hero. That's what we first came out with, and that's what most of our sales are from. Now, I'm always wearing a nose strip on camera and in person because what happened was people started to ask a follow-up question. Well, what about my nose?
Right.
You're trying to force nasal breathing, but I don't breathe so well out of my nose. Maybe I've got a deviated septum.
Right.
So I went, okay, well, how do we add value and help solve maybe another problem that is absolutely related to what we're trying to do? And then we can also increase order value, again, add more value to the customer. So I said, all right, to be blunt, let's take a breathe right, actually make it look cool.
Yeah, I like it.
So we made it black, and now people can easily add on nose strips when they're getting their hostage mouth tape in their orders. Now I know
I think that's a huge thing. It's important because who wants to sleep with a CPAP, for example?
Nobody does.
Nobody
does. Now again,
as a man, you're dating, you want to bring somebody over. The last thing you want to do is say, put this machine device on.
CPAPs are sexy, right? No, they're not.
No, absolutely not.
In fact, we've got a new video campaign angle that we made with this sexy CPAP. It's going to be really funny. But so when we talk about CPAPs, I would love for you to talk about this because I'm not a doctor, and I always tell people, look, I'm not a doctor, but from my experience, from the people who are CPAP wearers on hostage tape, I see two camps. There's people who they wear CPAP and they wear hostage tape because it absolutely helps the machine work better because most people if their mouth's open, the air just goes in and out the mouth, and then obviously the machine doesn't work. So when they discover Hotch's tape, they're like, "This is amazing. It actually fits well with whatever mask I'm wearing. It doesn't get in the way, feels comfortable, and my machine works great." That's one camp. Awesome. But then there's another camp of people who say, "I don't have to use my CPAP anymore."
Yeah.
You know, and most of those people, in my experience, they're people who aren't overweight.
Right.
They're regular people like us, who may have been on a CPAP. And again, I'm not a doctor, but I would say if you're not overweight, you probably don't need to be on a CPAP. But you tell me, is that like, what's your thoughts on that?
It's actually, there is a misconception about obstructive sleep apnea and airway disorders and weight. People that are overweight have, a significantly higher risk of obstruction and sleep apnea. So it's very rare that someone is overweight and doesn't have sleep problems, for sure. And, the more fit, the more lean they are, the better chance that they don't have it. But because of the jaw size, that's an issue. We have patients that are very thin, very lean, and still, if they're not getting surgery, require CPAP. And I think that the jaw size problem, I call it an epidemic, is huge, because if you accept what we know from science, that the jaws are way smaller than they used to be, then that means that everybody has obstruction to airflow.
Right.
Even at their fittest, leanest, they're set up to not breathe great or sleep great. And I think that that's true. I see that from, seeing 1,000 consults.
So that makes sense then. So what you're saying is the judge shouldn't necessarily be weight. It's actually potentially the jaw.
It's the
jaw.
More than anything. And then weight exacerbates it.
Yeah.
So it's going to make it more severe, more obvious. Very, very rarely. I would bet that 99% of people that are clinically overweight have sleep disordered breathing.
Oh, because that could be one of the main causes.
Definitely. Even if you have great jaw structure, gaining weight's going to limit it's not just fat and tissue on the outside, but it's on the inside too.
It's interesting when you talk about this. Now that I'm as experienced in this over the last number of years, I can, whenever I'm in public, I can identify mouth breathers just by looking at them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you can too. Like
all the time.
I can look at somebody and go, yep, they're a mouth breather for sure, because you can just see it in the way that their jaw is formed.
And it's not regional. We just traveled from Europe, and I was in Frankfurt Airport and looking around, and I noticed the same exact thing I see at Bush International Airport. Is the majority of people, 71% or more, are mouth breathing.
We'll say, oh, does it really actually help my face look better, my jaw look better when I wear mouth tape? And I will typically respond and say, if you're an adult, it won't change your anatomy. It might appear to be different because maybe your mouth is shut, maybe you're putting your tongue on the roof of your mouth, so it appears to be different.
Right.
But it's not actually changing. But if you're a kid, then yes, it will 100% change. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I accept that as truth, actually. I think that, people, it's popularized now as mewing.
Yeah.
And having good tongue posture, nasal breathing. If kids do that from an early age, they're going to develop movie star faces.
Yeah.
And that's why it's gained popularity on TikTok, because it's real. The problem for adults is that the bone structure is not really going to change much. However, it's still worthwhile doing because it'll prevent worsening of facial features. So for sure, continued mouth breathing in an adult will continue to worsen the facial features. It'll continue to make the jaws look weaker, the faces look longer, the breathing to get worse. So there's no bad time to start, because if you're a child, it'll develop better. But if you're an adult, it'll help you from developing worse. I think there's going to be a paradigm shift in medicine. Because dentists are the experts of the mouth. Right. And all the signs of this are in the mouth.
The holistic ones. Because I know from what I'm told,
a lot of them are behind. I'm talking about 5 years from now.
Okay, from what I'm
They'll
told,
get it.
there's two camps of dentists.
Yep.
There's the holistic ones who are much more forward thinking.
Yep.
But then there's the traditional ones who are still like stuck in the old
Yeah.
way.
And it's funny because just like that point that you made, the holistic dentists were looked at crazy.
Yeah.
But that's not true
Yeah.
anymore. You know,
Well, doesn't it?
there are more and more dentists that are looking into holistic and functional
Isn't that?
pathways.
Isn't that also like wisdom teeth?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it the traditional dentists thought this is what we should always be doing, but now they're like, no, we should not be taking wisdom teeth out. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Wisdom teeth is interesting. The problem is that most people don't have room for them. Jaws are too small and there's no room for the wisdom teeth. They get trapped sideways, locked in, and they're
so
at
you have to take them out regardless.
a lot of them. Not everybody, but most people. And this just goes to the fact this goes and supports that jaws have become small, because this wasn't true 500,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago. People had room for their wisdom teeth, but now almost everybody is recommended to take their wisdom teeth out. The reason is they can't erupt in a normal position, so they get stuck. When they get stuck, they're at risk for pathology like cysts or infections, and they're dangerous. So it's not necessarily that removing them is bad, but what I think is bad is not understanding why we have to remove them, that there's a jaw size problem. And then if you don't understand that, then you're never going to address, as a community, they're never going to address the jaw size problem, right? Because they're not even calling it a jaw size problem.
Okay.
But I think that now the new thinking and the forward thinkers in dentistry and medicine are saying like, hey, yeah, you may need your wisdom teeth out because you have no room, but let's address the problem, which is the jaws are too small. That's why you didn't have room for the wisdom teeth. That's why they need to come out. Let's address that, make them bigger so that you can breathe.
So, okay. How do you respond to, because a common comment that we'll get, like a critique, people will always say, like, mouth taping is dumb. You should be addressing the root of the issue, not taping your mouth shut. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah. So they both could be true, right? The root of the issue, I think, is always the goal, because if you can find the root of the issue, then you can help the bottom line, help the structure, make these things better. But, you know, and this goes back to one of the points I want to talk about, biohacking, because this is something you understand, I understand, and people in this space really understand it. And what I mean by that is most people that think about nasal breathing and are doing tape, they eat lean, they're low carb. I bet you're low carb. Mm-hmm. They wake up early, they exercise, they cold plunge, they ground. They're doing everything they can to optimize their health, right? Because nothing is just, there's no magic pill. There, you know, there's so like we talked about the reasons for this epidemic and the problem, and it's more than one reason. Mm-hmm. It's multiple factors, multiple environmental factors that led to this road. So even if we bring the jaws forward, for example, which is something I do, it doesn't mean that that's all you need. They still have to exercise, work out, work on nasal breathing, ground, meditate to have optimal function, right? So yes, root cause is important, and that'll make things better. All these things in my mind, and I call it the best biohacking tool, is to make the jaws bigger. Yeah. All of it falls in a category of let's biohack, in a sense that we're going to hit every receptor we can, target every part of the body we can to optimize better living. So it could be true that say, hey, let's get to the root cause, but that doesn't mean you don't attack it at every level you can attack it. So even in someone where we can fix the jaws, I'm going to recommend everything they can: mouth taping, nasal breathing, and actually, I'm probably going to recommend your products to all my patients post-op. Brilliant. Because in collaboration, it's going towards the same goal. So that's my answer. Yes, root cause is important, but you have to target. It's so multifactorial in this problem. You know, even with perfect structure, people have developed habits, and nasal apparatus is not even built for nasal breathing because they haven't been all their life. So even if you were to fix the root cause, you still need to rehab the function, right? So what you're doing is helping out with function.
Yeah. And
So-
making it cool.
And making it cool. Yeah, you got to make it sexy. Otherwise,
Exactly.
nobody's gonna do it or
What's
use
funny?
it.
What's funny about that is so we started to ask a lot of our customers, why hostage tape? And a lot of the responses we get are because it's cool. You guys are cool. You're making it cool.
That's true.
So I feel like, are we making it cool in your eyes?
Yeah,
we are, right?
Definitely. I mean,
So that's
I
good.
showed you. We walked around the office, and everybody has their hostage
Nasal sticks.
nasal sticks on
Yeah.
the desk. Yeah, but I agree, and it's such a like, this stuff. What you're selling is going to the bedroom.
Yep.
Right? Like, you got to look cool in the bedroom. That's like 101.
As cool as you can
As
look
cool
with,
as you can
with tape
look
on your mouth,
in
right?
the bedroom. If you're not doing that,
Exactly.
you're setting yourself up for failure. So,
Totally.
talk about biohacking and quality of life. All these things are important.
We get it. We
for
get the
it.
joke a lot where people will say, "What is my date gonna think if I've got a tin that says hostage tape on the side of my bed?" Right?
They may be into it.
We get a lot of ball gag jokes too. Right?
Right.
Like, great, what's next? Your hostage ball gag.
Yeah. That's good. That's all good attention.
Exactly.
Johnny is a huge fan of the UFC. I'm a fan of the UFC also. It's obviously, I'm a huge proponent of the sport. There's a lot of skill, determination, work ethic, health into it.
Yep.
It's an amazing sport and it's entertaining. You guys are in that space. I would say it's a cool space to be in. How did you get in there? What's your involvement with them?
This is a great story. I love telling this story. So I'll tell this story. So, we're 2.5 years in to the business, and a partnership with the UFC. Like, they're a major brand around the world.
Huge brand.
One of the major ones. So, and you look at who sponsors them now. You see Prime. You see Monster, you see Manscaped, you see all these big brand, Budweiser, Bud Light, all that. And you're like, I don't know that we're there.
Right.
So I just didn't have the headspace to think that we would ever be a UFC brand at any point soon. So we got a call from the UFC and they said, hey, we'd love to talk about you guys, maybe being a sponsor with Power Slap. So there's the UFC, and then they have Power Slap as one of their new brands.
Yep.
And if you haven't seen it, it's crazy. People stand in front of each other and they slap the crap out of each
I've
other.
seen
It's
it.
wild.
Yeah, I've seen it.
It
makes for good TikTok reels.
It's super viral, super crazy, especially
Right.
when you go in person and you watch it in Vegas. It's wild. So I immediately went, absolutely, let's go there and let's talk to him.
Yeah.
So I literally, just like this podcast, we literally talked like 2 days ago, and we were like,
right.
I'm going to be in Houston. Let's make it happen. Boom. And now we're sitting here talking.
Yeah, amazing.
I said, let's go to Vegas. We hopped on a plane, and that was around the Super Bowl time. So we go to Vegas. We go into UFC headquarters, and we sit down, and they start pitching us, and they say, Alex, we've actually changed our minds. We think hostage tape would be great for UFC. I'm like,
Amazing.
okay.
Yeah.
So we go through the pitch, and I'm like kind of blown away about how perfect the brand, the demographic of who follows, watches UFC,
It falls right in.
and who they are, what they stand for. I'm like, this is actually pretty brilliant,
Right.
We just have to negotiate the right price because obviously I'm not Prime Energy,
Right.
or Monster, so it just has to make sense from a
For sure.
from a cash perspective. So later that night, they had Power Slap. And so we go to Power Slap. And again, this is right around the Super Bowl time in Vegas. The Super Bowl was in Vegas.
Yep.
So it's crazy.
It's wild.
Everybody. So we go to Power Slap, and there was like the who's who of the internet at Power Slap. Like every major YouTuber, NFL people, everybody was there. So when you go to Power Slap, right, it's this VIP conference room that they block off. And again, they only let VIP people in this thing. And so we were there, my team, and we're always branded up, and we were sitting eye level across from Dana, Lorenzo, Hunter, all those guys. And next to Dana at Power Slap is a VIP seat, and he always has the big dick of the moment,
Right.
like, sit next to him.
Yep.
And he had Travis Scott,
Yeah.
he had Charles Barkley, he had Tom Brady. When Tom Brady walked in, and for me as a former quarterback,
Yeah.
I love Tom Brady.
Yeah. It's the GOAT.
You love his story, everything about
Absolutely.
him. So when he walked in, I about lost it. He sits down next to Dana, and I'm like, oh my God, there's Tom Brady.
Right.
This is amazing. So then they walk up, and they're like, all right, Alex, are you ready to meet
And
Dana?
Tom's about the same age, right?
He's a little bit older than me.
Is he?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a couple of years older. He was leaving Michigan. So he played at Michigan. I played at Minnesota. So he was leaving Michigan. I think he left Michigan when I went to Minnesota. So he's
Yep.
a couple years older. And so they're like, all right, Alex, are you ready to meet Dana? I'm like, right after Tom Brady? Hell yeah, I'm ready to meet Dana White. But the event ends. So we go into the back room, into this VIP room, and the Nelk boys are in there, like just everybody. Shout out to Kyle and the Nelk boys. They're big hostage tapers, by the way.
Nice.
So we go into the back room, and I walk up to Dana. He turns around. He's got the big old grin on his face, and he looks at me and he goes, Lorenzo, where's Lorenzo at? He goes, Alex. So we're sitting there, right? Lorenzo's sitting next to me. He bumps me. He says, look, the hostage tape guys are here.
Nice.
Lorenzo walks over, shakes my hand. He's like, Alex, I just want to say I love the product. I've been using it now for a bunch of months. It's changed my life. Hunter Campbell walks over, shakes my hand, says the same thing. And I'm sitting there going, just a few years ago, hostage tape didn't exist. And I'm standing here in this room with some of the biggest names,
Yeah.
one of the biggest brands in the world, and they're telling me how much they love this brand that we created.
It's amazing.
And so then a few months later, we signed the deal, and then we became the official sleep aid of the UFC.
Tell me about Hostage Tape. When did it start?
All right, so the story of Hostage Tape. So I launched Hostage Tape about 2.5 years ago. This was in fact, we sold our first order in March of 2022. Okay. But the story of it really goes back even years before that, right? So I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. And so I started a business prior to this. I ran it for 16 years. It was a software company. And in the course of that business, that I scaled it, bootstrapped it, I lost myself, right? Gained a bunch of weight. I was so focused on the business. I was sleeping like crap. My wife slept in the other bedroom for years. And we ended up going through a divorce, right? So like lowest point you can imagine. All of it came to a culmination. And so I had sold my business and I was vesting the equity out. And I hated the company that I sold it to. Because look, when you're an entrepreneur, you always have those illusions of grandeur of, I'm going to sell the business, make a lot of money. Or if I sell it to a company, then we can take it to another level. So you start thinking about, what am I going to do next? Because I'm an entrepreneur.
Right.
I'm a cowboy. I need to figure something out that I can do to control my destiny, to have something to do, right? I don't like working for somebody else. I like controlling what I want to do and forging my path and being able to take care of my people. So I'm at this low point. Keep this in mind, right? I'm at this low point where, you go through a divorce, all your assets are frozen. You have to sell the house. And so I was living in my aunt's basement.
I can relate right now.
Okay.
Going through it.
Yeah. So I was living in my aunt's basement at the time because you have to sell the house. We had to sell the house. But then you can't do anything after that.
Yeah,
so I'm like,
you're frozen.
You're frozen. So I'm in my aunt's basement doing this job that I hated, right? This company that I hated. And I had that moment of like, all right, what do I need to do to work on myself as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a leader, all of those things. So I started looking at my sleep. My sleep was the first thing I went, okay, what do I need to do? Because I'd always slept so bad.
Right.
Like I said earlier, I snored so awful that it pushed my wife into the other bedroom for years, right?
Yeah.
And that was a huge...
The weight gain probably made it so much worse.
Yeah, it was. I was... So right now I'm about 175 pounds. I'm a 9% body fat. And at the time I was 210, you know? And so for a guy my size...
That's a big difference.
Pretty big difference, right? There's definitely a lot of extra weight that I was carrying.
For sure.
That probably wasn't helping, for sure. And I've been a mouth breather my whole life.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
I didn't know why.
You weren't aware about it.
Right? So when I went down that journey, you do the same thing that most people do. You go, okay, you go on Amazon. How do I stop snoring?
Right.
And I looked at the cheap mouth guards that don't work. You buy one of those things, you put it in, and it just hurts like hell, and it actually keeps your mouth open. And then you end up drooling over your pillow.
Exactly.
Right. So I tried all those other...
most people don't realize, very bad for the TMJs.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's over the counter.
Right. It doesn't
ones.
actually put your jaw in probably the right way that you could probably explain. And the more digging that I did, I came up... I found James Nestor's article. There was an excerpt from the book that he wrote, Breath.
Yeah. Excellent book.
Phenomenal book, bestseller, and it's such an easy read with how he wrote it.
It's great.
It's not overly medical. But when he talked about the experiment where they go to Stanford Medical Center for 10 days,
right,
and they plug their nose, and then over those 10 days, they developed sleep apnea. They snored like crazy. Oxygen levels went through the floor.
Yeah.
And then after those 10 days, they unplugged their nose and they mouth taped. And what do you think happened after one day?
Yeah.
Everything went away.
Right.
And I went, this light bulb went off in my head, and I went,
it's huge.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's it. Mouth breathing. And I had never heard of that concept before. Being an athlete my whole life, my coaches never taught me that.
Right.
Like, that's something that's been lost.
It's
in
amazing.
Western society.
Completely lost. And it's so prevalent.
Yeah. So when I discovered that, I went on Amazon right away. And at the time, there wasn't a lot really. The category of mouth taping was very broad. Like, you'd see a bunch of 3M tapes, a bunch of surgical tapes, just a bunch of just generic kind of things.
Yep.
So you don't really know what to get. So I just kind of bought what I thought was the right thing to get it. And I'll never forget it. I had it. I'm sitting in my bed. And before I put it on, the same thought went through my head that everybody has go through their head. Before they do it, they go, wait a minute. Am I going to die? What if my nose gets clogged? Like, am I going to make it through the night? So it's a perfectly normal reaction to have when you're mouth taping for the first time. Perfectly normal, right? So then I went, no, my nose was meant to breathe. Like, I'll be fine. So I put it on. When I woke up the next day, I felt like my teenage son. The amount of energy that I had. Because when you get poor sleep, it stacks, right?
It's huge.
And when you finally get great sleep, you can't believe how you felt.
Yep.
So when that happened, the entrepreneur in me went, this is it. This is my next idea.
Yeah, it's a huge,
and
it's a wide open market.
Right. Well, the challenge was, okay, tape is essentially a commodity.
Sure.
So is there actually a big enough business here that I could build to make it sustainable, to actually have a moat, all of those things? And so then I went to work into figuring out, all right, what kind of tape actually solves problems with what's out there? So I looked at what you had out there right now was really rigid. Normal tape's really rigid. It's not really very comfortable.
Yep.
It didn't always work well with facial hair. You know, all these boxes of why most men didn't mouth tape.
Most of them don't work well with facial hair.
They don't work well with facial hair. Plus, too, anything no man is going to be inspired to go buy 3M tape from the pharmacy. It's just, there's no great story there that's inspiring. And most people they're motivated by an emotional reaction or some story, something they can connect to, right? And that, the entrepreneur in me went, that's it. that's what I need to do. And at the time, I was really into liquid death. And if you know liquid death,
Yeah.
you know, Mike and the team did
It's
a
great
phenomenal
branding.
job
Yeah.
of creating this brand around the biggest commodity in the planet,
Yeah.
water. So that inspired me to then go, okay. Now, at the time, I didn't know I was going to call it hostage tape. Okay. But what inspired me to call it that was originally, so whenever my kids would be at my house, I used to warn them and I'd say, hey guys, I'm going to warn you. If you run into the room and you see me, don't freak out. It's going to look like I'm being held hostage. Okay.
I like it.
I didn't know it at the time
Okay.
that that's what I would end up calling it.
That's perfect.
So then later I went, wait a minute,
It's a great name.
hostage tape. That's it. Because it's actually, there's a double-sided meaning to it that a lot of people don't know. So the obvious is, yes, you do look like you're being held hostage when you have tape in your mouth. That's
Correct.
the obvious.
Yep.
But the flip side of the coin is actually we're tapping into this core emotion people feel.
Yeah.
People feel held hostage by
Yeah.
poor sleep or their partner,
Absolutely.
and they don't know what to do. That was really kind of where it was born out of. And then I went to my business partner, Ben. He's the creative genius behind it. So when I went to him and I said, dude, I got this idea for mouth tape. I want to call it hostage tape. He went, oh my God, I've been looking at mouth tape too, because he was having the same issue.
Yeah.
And he loved the idea of calling it hostage tape. So then he got to work, and he's the one who created the branding, everything you know today. We're not just some mouth tape company that thought we could make a lot of money.
Right.
There's a real story behind why I started it that most men can relate to.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. There's a mission behind it.
huge
But
mission behind
what's
it.
interesting, I'm sure you guys have done the market research to see what the incidence of sleep apnea in this demographic is.
Oh yeah.
I can tell you too from
Well,
being
here's
in
the stat that I
business.
use.
Yep.
So the stat that I use that blows people away, there's 128 roughly million households in the U.S. And according to a study that was actually done by a competitor, Breathe Right? Breathe Right, who makes the nose strip
strips,
that everybody
right.
knows. They did a study that over 71% of people mouth breathe
Yeah.
at night.
Yeah.
So when you think about just the TAM,
That might even underrepresent
maybe it
the
does.
true incidence.
Right.
But even that number is crazy.
Yeah, you think about that and you go, this is a much larger problem than we realize.
Yeah.
And also, but I think with that, the bigger hurdle and issue is just the pure ignorance around mouth breathing. Most
Yeah,
people don't
absolutely.
understand that mouth breathing is bad. We are the largest mouth tape brand in the world, and it's not even close.
Right.
And now we're becoming the mouth tape brand.
That's amazing.
When people think of mouth tape, they think of us.
It's amazing because it's so early in this world of breathing.
Yeah.
You know, you came up with this a couple of years ago. James Nestor's book is not that old.
No.
And you know, I give him credit for popularizing this a little bit, but the majority of people who still have access to this information is very small.
Well, we cite his book and him all the time.
Yeah.
Like I cite that study that he did at Stanford all the time, just because it's the easiest thing that I can say. It's like the easiest social proof for me to say, go read this book. It was a bestseller. Anybody can read it. And then when they read it, they
It's
go,
mind-blowing.
holy
Right.
crap.
You mean the nose is there to breathe?
Yeah.
It's a crazy concept.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing.
It's so obvious, but you're right. We never even learn
Yeah.
about it. Consider an oral maxillofacial surgeon. I have a medical degree, a dental degree.
Yeah.
I'm really a sleep apnea based oral surgeon. We're treating airway, and I'm a huge advocate of your product. I think that it's a huge additive for really in the medicine space. I think that nasal breathing is so important. I think that an aid like what you have, which is cool and usable, is a game changer. And we're going to use it for our patients post-op.
Love it. We'll have to get you. So we have the sample packs. What we'll have to do, I don't know if we did, but we'll make sure you have boxes of it.
Yeah.
So you can give samples out to anybody you want to.
Appreciate that. Yeah, appreciate that.
Awesome.
We'll have all of Houston
Have we
walking
sent
around
you?
with nasal.
Have we not sent you guys samples of stuff to give out?
Because
if we haven't, we will.
That's why we have the sticks around the office.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I'll make
but
sure.
definitely. But I'd love to get them to the patients.
Okay. We'll make sure the guys do that.
Yeah,
We get on that right away.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Awesome.
Sweet.